I've already called the meeting to order and have read the statement of the chair for the public hearing. Now we're going to do a report from planning on zoning amendment bylaw number 3493, 2022.
Bylaw number 3493 to 2022 is a general collection or omnibus of amendments to zoning bylaw number 3462, 2021. These proposed amendments address topical issues that have emerged since the last zoning bylaw update. Undertaking the amendments will streamline regulatory interpretations and approvals and ensure that zoning bylaw number 3462, 2021 is a, quote, living document that is clear, cohesive, and an effective land use tool. The amendments in this proposal are presented in two sections. Section 1 covers 12 items that include additions and alterations of definitions, permitted uses within existing zones, and signage regulations, as well as the removal of Marina District Zone from industrial zones and the consequent renumbering. As these are generally housekeeping items, I will not go into great detail on these, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you or the public may have. Section 2 provides a report on accessory dwelling units that includes a proposed permitting of lock-off suites in multifamily buildings and expanding secondary suites to be permitted in two-family homes. So I will read a list of the Section 1 amendments. So these include an addition of animal hospital or clinics as a use in commercial zones, clarification of gross floor area and building footprint definition, clarification of creative industry definition, the addition of MD1, Marine District Zone, as separate from industrial zones, changes to shipping container temporary use permissions, signage amendments, changes to marina parking requirements, changes to home office definition, changes to off-street parking definition, changes to single-family dwellings definition, the removal of repetition in uses under C2 general commercial zone, and the removal of setback requirements under C3 service commercial zone. As some concern has been expressed around the proposed change to the use of shipping containers, I will speak a little bit to this more in detail. So the proposed change is to allow shipping containers in all zones up to 60 days for temporary storage use. They are otherwise prohibited except in industrial zones or with temporary use permits. Storage containers are currently subject, as I said, to the temporary use permit application process, which requires review before council and public notification. Consequently, it takes at least 1 month, if not several, for permits for temporary use of shipping containers to be issued. And for emergency uses such as flooding and for temporary storage that would be completed within the time frame it takes to get a permit, this permitting process can add unnecessary burden. As I've said, shipping containers continue to be prohibited in non-industrial zones outside of the specific time period and use. Therefore, violating this bylaw would result in enforcement through traditional bylaw processes, which are complaint-driven. In terms of Section 2, a little background, Council has been actively working on the housing challenge in Prince Rupert, and specifically in 2021, Council endorsed a series of housing actions resulting from the Council Housing Actions Workshop on June 15th, 2021. And one of these actions was to consider amending the zoning bylaw to allow secondary suites and duplexes and multifamily buildings. This would be and within multifamily business buildings, this would be limited to bachelor one-bedroom lock-off suites. The proposed changes in this report are a result of this action. And a little background, accessory dwelling units can provide rental income to homeowners. They can offer an affordable way for renters to live in residential neighborhoods. They can also help offset high building costs that are characteristic of the North Coast and be a mortgage helper. Accessory dwelling units often have 1 and 2 bedrooms, which adds to our stock of smaller households and single-family dwellings, or rather, single dwellers. And this can help loosen the rental market, which also allows and supports a younger population, incoming workers for the port and other industries, and family members to age in place. And therefore, these actions can help maintain families here and support anticipated growth without significant form and character changes to existing neighborhoods or introducing sprawl. So the housing situation in Prince Rupert is well suited to densification through the addition of accessory dwelling units, which include secondary suites and lock-off suites. And the proposed amendment in this omnibus includes the introduction of lock-off suites in multifamily housing and the permitting of secondary suites in two-family dwellings or duplexes. The changes would include an alteration to the definition for two-family residential dwellings to permit 1 secondary suite per principal dwelling. It would add a definition for lock-off suites And it would add the general, it would alter section 3.4 describing general provisions of secondary suites in order to allow secondary suite as an accessory use to a single or two family dwelling. It would ensure lock-off suite is permitted as an accessory use to dwelling unit within multifamily buildings. And it would define size restrictions for, including floor area restrictions, and the requirement for additional off-street parking, 1 per unit. It would also just maintain the subject that units must not be short-term rental, which means less than 1 month, as these take rental units off the rental market, and it would allow 1 accessory dwelling unit permitted for each principal dwelling. So I'm happy to take questions now.
Great. Well, we're going to hear from the public, and if there's any need to call you back, we'll definitely do that, okay? But if council will probably, in the regular meeting, might have some questions for sure. Okay, is there any members of the public that want to come speak to the public hearing? Welcome.
Hello, my name's Terry Salka. I just want to, I've gone through the information that was provided to me, and I have a query about a couple of things. One is the veterinary clinics. Is the intent to have veterinary clinics pop up in residential areas? That's my question on that. And the housing, most of the houses in this town, in a cul-de-sac that I live in, it's single dwelling housing. I could very convert my house with the carport and my workshop into a 2-bedroom apartment, and the downstairs in the my rec room and another bedroom that's already wired in for a kitchen to another apartment. So that could be a triplex. I'm sure my neighbor would have an issue with that. And if it was the other way around, I would have an issue with that as well. And I kind of take issue that we're trying to create or solve a problem by converting single dwelling homes into multi-dwelling homes. And I take issue with that. There's a lot of apartments in this town, believe it or not, that aren't rented for various reasons. There's apartments that are being used as B&Bs. I don't know whether they are licensed, but there is I'm aware of at least 8 or 9 that aren't. But they go on the internet and they put their name out, and people come in, they stay for 2 or 3 days, they charge $150 a night, and they're gone. So that's the one concern I have with expanding the single dwelling, I'll call them empty nest houses, where the kids are gone and there's mom and pop there and they've got extra room. So this would allow something like that to be converted into a multi-dwelling, my understanding, you could correct me if I'm wrong, a multi-dwelling residence, which one of the problems will be is the parking. Like if I convert my house, there's no parking in the cul-de-sac. So what do? Do I buy some, as Councilor Nishter told me a while back, I buy some ghost parking that doesn't exist, and I just take up space in a cul-de-sac, and the heck with my neighbor. So that's one issue with the changing the multi-dwelling. If that's the intent, from a single to a multi-dwelling house. I know there's a place just down the street from us. It used to be a dental place, and now it's been converted into, I think, a fourplex. There was a sign up. We didn't get notice, which I find it kind of interesting, because the guy across the street was building a garage last year, and we got notice from the city that he's applied for a variance, but we didn't get notice on this other one. which is nor here nor there. They're proceeding regardless. So that's the concerns I have.
Okay, thank you. If is there any clarity you could provide for the veterinarian and then maybe the dwelling question as well?
So I'll try to clarify a couple of those points. Firstly, with the veterinary clinics, we do actually already interpret veterinary clinics under retail service. Retail service is permitted in all commercial zones. Therefore, veterinary clinics or animal hospitals are already permitted in all of those zones. It's just a clarification of language because we did have some people come in wondering about whether they could go in those zones.
But they're not allowed in residential, correct?
They're not allowed in residential zones.
Okay.
That is correct, yeah. In terms of the issue of conversion of secondary, single-family dwellings into multifamily dwellings, so the amendment, currently single-family dwellings are allowed secondary suites. If a single-family dwelling were to add a secondary suite, that is not permitted under the zoning bylaw. If an existing duplex were to add a secondary suite per unit, that would trigger, that would require a building permit, and that would trigger the need to add additional parking. I hope that clarifies a little bit the process around parking, and it wouldn't be a conversion of a single-family unit to something like a triplex.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. And I'll open up the opportunity if there's any other questions. Oh,
Thank you. I did receive an email that was requested to read out from Mr. Rick Casey of Prince Rupert. So he's looking for some explanation as to how the new bylaw will work, and states the city along with neighbors need a record of container placement. There has to be something to start the clock and document the placement for bylaw enforcement. If I need to place a container, I should be required to inform the city of the date the container is to be placed prior to placement and agree to start the permitting process should I require it longer. There should be a reference of penalty in the bylaw should I not move the container after the 60-day period has elapsed. The use of the 60-day regulation should only be allowed once per calendar year, determined after initial placement of container under the 60-day rule. This rule will stop people from removing the container for a week and then returning it. If the bylaw has no record of it being placed after a complaint, the officer will have to witness it in its location and without written proof of when it was placed on the 60-day clock, would then have to start at the point of giving the offender 120 days in the yard. Mr. Casey also notes that the bylaw was not on the city's website, and I just wanted to clarify that we don't post bylaws until they're passed. He was able to find it on a copy of the agenda, but we don't post them as final until they're passed.
great. Thank you. Okay, we'll keep those comments into consideration. Any other further comments? Call a second time. Any further comments? And I'll call a third and final time for any further comments. Okay, council will have a discussion in our regular meeting on this bylaw, thanks to the comments provided. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the public hearing. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Niche. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion's carried. We'll see you at 7 o'clock.